In 2006, the church changed a word in its own scripture, not a footnote, not a manual. The introduction to the Book of Mormon itself, the page every member has held in their hands. One word quietly swapped in the second printing of a trade edition most people never noticed existed. No press release, no general conference talk. A church spokesman gave one line to a reporter who asked why, and that was the entire public explanation.
The church requested that edit in 2006, 8 years before it published an official essay on DNA in the Book of Mormon. We're going to look at exactly what changed, what the church said about it, and how long members continued receiving copies with the old wording after the new version was already in print.
Hannah and Jess, we got away. Now we're unpacking what they won't say. Behind temple walls and cover-ups, we're pouring tea in your coffee cups. It's the post-Mormon post-mortem, digging up what they want forgotten. Trauma, truth, and crime, yeah, we're surviving. It's post-Mormon post-mortem.
Hello, Eternal Family. Welcome to Post-Mormon Post-Mortem, the podcast where we lovingly sift through the ashes of our former faith, one bizarre belief and repressed memory at a time.
We explore everything from the church's cultural weirdness and doctrinal whiplash to the deep wounds of religious trauma, Mormon crime, and the messy, glorious road to recovery.
Whether you are freshly out, years removed, or just Exmo curious, this really is the right place. We're here to hold space, spill tea, and call out the cultist stuff hiding in plain sight. I'm your host, Jess.
And I'm Hannah.
The Book of Mormon's narrative starts with a family, Lehi's family, leaving Jerusalem around 600 BCE. They build a ship, they cross the ocean, they land somewhere in the Western Hemisphere, and over the generations that follow, their descendants split into two peoples, Nephites and Lamanites. By the book's internal timeline, the Lamanites are the ones who survive. For more than 150 years, church leaders taught from the pulpit, in Sunday school manuals, in general conference, that Native Americans were Lamanites, literal descendants of a family that left the Middle East 2,600 years ago.
The 1981 edition of the Book of Mormon, the edition that you, our listeners, and Jess and I grew up with, made a claim explicit in its introduction written by Bruce R. McConkie, who was then a member of the Quorum of the 12. He said, quote, "After thousands of years, all were destroyed except the Lamanites, and they are the principal ancestors of the American Indians." Close quote.
So the Book of Mormon itself is the claim. It doesn't have a teaching about Native American ancestry sitting alongside it. The ancestry claim is what the book is on its own terms. The church taught the book's claimed premise.
This was a claim about the ancestry of living Native people. Missionaries told Native American investigators in these words or words close to them, "You are the house of Israel. Your ancestors are the people written about in this book." Do you know anyone who went on a mission to like one of the reservations or?
I don't know anybody that went on a mission, but I know a physician and his wife. They were not Mormon, but they went to a reservation, and I remember having dinner with them. It was a bigger group, and listening to the physician. His name was Bill Flood, was commenting on how many Mormons there were and how surprised he was by that.
Interesting. Among the natives.
He was,
yeah. I think the first copy of the Book of Mormon published not in English was Navajo, I think. I could be making that up. Don't quote me on that.
I don't know. I can't fact check you, so.
Absolutely. Do not quote me on that. No, well, yeah, we'll fact check ourselves in real time, or we can count on our listeners to fact check us in the comments.
They sure will. But so this claim that they were of the house of Israel, that was printed. It was specific and testable. And then along came the science.
Uh-oh. Nobody knew about science. I mean, To think there was a time when we didn't know about DNA,
There
right?
was time. Yeah.
Okay, starting in the 1990s, researchers started comparing mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome data from indigenous populations across North, Central, and South America. The results were consistent. Native American ancestry traces to East Asian populations in line with migration across the Bering Land Bridge around 15,000 years ago. And that's still the scientific consensus.
So none of these studies, not one, across every population sample, turn up a Near Eastern genetic signature in pre-Columbian Native American populations. If a family group left Jerusalem around 600 BCE and became, as the book's introduction claimed, the principal ancestors of Native Americans, that would leave a detectable genetic mark. It doesn't. The scientific consensus on this point is not in dispute.
Yeah, unfortunately, the genetic evidence doesn't support the claim made in the 1981 introduction of the Book of Mormon that Lamanites were the principal ancestors of Native Americans. Science cannot address or settle every broader claim attached to the Book of Mormon, but that is a claim that science can test. Before we get into the part most people haven't heard about, if this receipts first kind of digging is useful to you, the easiest way to help us keep going is to subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you've got 30 seconds, please leave us a rating. It really does help people find the show.
It does. Okay, back to 2006. The church doesn't dispute this science. The 2014 Gospel Topics essay doesn't argue that DNA data is wrong. It accepts the finding and offers explanations for why the finding doesn't have to mean what it appears to mean. There's an earlier document, though, where the church had already quietly made an accommodation to this same evidence in print, 8 years before the essay existed.
In the second printing of the 2006 Doubleday Trade edition of the Book of Mormon, the church requested a one-word change to that introduction. Principal became among. So it went from, they are the principal ancestors of the Native Americans, to, they are among the ancestors of the Native Americans. The change carried into the 2013 official edition, and that's the wording that's still in print today, although it will likely change anytime. It's apt to do that.
It's funny how that happens. LDS spokesman Mark Tuttle was asked about the change at the time, and here's the explanation he gave in full. It, quote, takes into account details of Book of Mormon demography which are not known, end quote. That's the entire public accounting, not we're responding to genetic evidence that contradicts the prior wording, not the DNA studies of the 1990s and early 2000s showed that this claim doesn't hold up. It's just a procedural sentence about demographic details with no acknowledgement that the change tracks directly onto the same scientific finding the DNA evidence had already established. Contemporaneous press coverage noted that a lot of observers connected the timing to the DNA controversy themselves. The church didn't make that connection for them.
No, it wouldn't do that. Although it's happy to do thinking for you everywhere else. God, I'm being so negative today.
Hannah's on a tear.
I'm usually so chipper about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah.
I know, I'm usually such a ray of sunshine, such a Pollyanna about the church. I mean, at least the essay, which came out in 2014, it lays out the church's argument. Back in 2006, when they made this change, the church didn't give an explanation, well, beyond what you said. So members were just expected to sit with the change without understanding why. And then 8 years later, the essay at least supplied the explanation for the edit that people had been wondering about.
Right. By 2014, the church had to reconcile 150 years of literal dissent teaching, a scripture that already quietly walked back its wording 8 years earlier, and the DNA evidence that it's not disputing. The essay gives readers three main responses. First, the small family defense. Lehi's group was small enough that their genetic signature could have been absorbed into a much larger existing population and become undetectable. Second, the not alone defense. The text of the Book of Mormon never explicitly states Lehi's family were the only people on the continent, so other populations may already have been present. Third, science has limits genetic evidence degrades over time. Sampling of ancient populations is incomplete, and absence of evidence isn't necessarily evidence of absence. And underneath all three, the essay says secular evidence can't prove or disprove the Book of Mormon either way.
If you go to the church's website and look at the essay on DNA in the Book of Mormon, I think they are counting on people to just look at the wall of science and go, oh, forget this, right? Like,
I think they are.
And just be totally put off by that. So for the people like me who spent high school science class peeling dry glue off their hands, instead of paying attention, this is how I conceptualize it. If you want to think about the genetics like this. Okay, so picture a huge swimming pool full of blue water and now add 1 drop of red food coloring. The red is Lehi's family, along with any other Book of Mormon groups. The blue is the millions of people the essay suggests were already living across the Americas. So over hundreds of years of people marrying, having children, and dying in all those monumental battles, and from disease, the red gets diluted until scientists can no longer detect it. Which is the small family theory that you were talking about, right, Jess?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So the essay uses population genetics concepts to explain how that could happen. Further, founder effect means we don't know which genetic markers Lehi's family carried, so we don't know exactly what to look for. Genetic drift means someone can still be your ancestor even if you inherited no identifiable DNA from them. Population bottleneck means colonization era diseases and violence could have wiped out entire genetic lines, and a small group's genetic signal can disappear into a much larger population, as in the swimming pool example.
It's just a whole lot of what ifs, you know, when you lay it out that way. It's like, well, it could have been this, or it could be that, or it could be, it's just gaslighting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for why exactly, and none of them take into account the actual reality that's known, which is the groups of people migrated across the
bridge. Yeah, I don't know. The whole set of explanations requires abandoning everything church leaders taught for 150 years about who Native Americans specifically are.
Yeah.
And you have to specifically abandon the church's 1981 printed language, right? The principal's ancestors' language, without ever describing that abandonment as an abandonment. They didn't do it in 2006 and not in 2014. Before we get into what it cost 2 men who said this, what I just said publicly, if you want to support the show directly, we've got Buy Me a Coffee and a Patreon. Both are linked in the show notes. Patreon's also where the full source list for every episode lives, so you can check our work yourselves.
Yep, every source, every episode. Okay, the archaeology question. On the archaeological question, were people already living in North America around 600 BCE? Yes, people had already been living across America for more than 10,000 years at that point. The Poverty Point culture in what's now Louisiana had established settlements and long-distance trade networks centuries earlier, and the Adena culture was taking shape in the Ohio Valley around the same time. Fascinating. None of those populations or Lehi's group left the Near Eastern genetic signature the 1981 introduction of the Book of Mormon would require.
In 2002, Thomas Murphy, an anthropologist and, at the time, a member of the church, published the first peer-reviewed article applying DNA evidence directly to the Book of Mormon's ancestry claims. His stake president asked him to either recant his conclusions or resign his membership, and he declined both. So a disciplinary council was scheduled for December 8th, 2002. Now, such a council could have ended in disfellowship, the former restriction on membership short of removal, or outright excommunication.
The council got postponed less than 24 hours before it was scheduled after the case drew national media attention. And then by February 2003, the church had dropped the disciplinary action. Now, Simon Southerton had already lost his testimony by 2003. He was a molecular biologist and a bishop who published Losing a Lost Tribe, Native Americans, DNA, and the Mormon Church in 2004. But he says, I listened to an interview with him around the genetics work. He said he went to bed one night in August 1998 with a firm testimony, and he woke up the next morning certain the church wasn't true. It wasn't as black and white that. He had said he had spent months kind of puzzling certain things out, and it was right around the same time the Ensign published an article justifying a literal belief in like the Tower of Babel and Noah's Ark. So he said it was just a bridge too far. He resigned as bishop and he stopped attending, but he remained officially on the membership rolls because he chose not to resign. And the reason I say that is because when the church excommunicated him in 2005, they said it was because he was having an inappropriate relationship. At that point, he and his wife had separated, and so he was dating someone, but he obviously wasn't a member, right? He didn't go to church, so it was like
but they wanted some reason to
yes, exactly.
Him, so there you go.
Exactly. So it's like, oh, you're technically still married. In fact, he and Jane have reconciled since then, but it was like, oh, you're married, so that's technically adultery. He said that it was his DNA work that was the real reason the church leaders pursued him, obviously, because people have affairs and they don't get excommunicated. And then the relationship was just used as the excuse and the formal charge. And I want to give a personal shout out to Simon Southerton, who was the young men's president in my ward when I was in young women's. And all of the youth adored Simon and Jane Southerton. And years later, when I went online looking for answers to my questions about Mormonism, Simon's exit story was the first thing I came across.
Well, that's cool. That's a cool connection there. As you were talking, I was thinking how the institution can make this accommodation, right? They can kind of quietly admit that this DNA evidence is there and it changes things. It doesn't cost them anything to do it for themselves. But these two men, these people who said it out loud in public, they paid for it. One narrowly avoided former discipline, and only once it became visible enough to become a liability because the press was looking into it.
100%. It's like they said the same things. Everybody's saying the same things. Why is the church not disciplining itself? Oh, it
never does.
It just doesn't work like that. Okay, so this can start to sound a little bit like a history lesson or a science lesson, although I'm here for the history lesson. But the teaching that we're talking about, as per usual, the institutional policies and doctrines, they have real people at the end of them. And this teaching in particular became the basis for one of the church's longest running programs involving Native children.
Yeah. The Indian Student Placement Program ran informally starting in 1947 and formally from 1954. It began winding down in the mid-1990s, with the church's records showing the final participants graduating around 2000. At its peak in the 1970-71 school year, more than 5,000 children were enrolled. That's in that single year. Historical estimates range from roughly 48 to 70,000 students, with 50,000 being the figure that you'll see most often. So Native American children who were already baptized members of the church were placed in white LDS foster homes during the school year. And church literature at the time explicitly framed this as helping Lamanite children specifically. So we know that there were some bad things that came out of this program. Between 2016 and 2018, 10 plaintiffs filed suit in Navajo Nation tribal court alleging sex abuse during the program and inadequate protection by the church. All of those, I believe, were settled.
Yeah, and we do not want to give that short shrift, but we will have to return to that in a subsequent episode. Okay. So the church ran that program for 50 years, enrolling tens of thousands of Native children under the same literal descent teaching that was in the Book of Mormon. Our Book of Mormon. Not that we ever read the introduction, but there you go.
Remember if I did or not.
Oh, well,
frankly. Yeah.
I think we had to mark it up.
Yeah.
Those scripture markers.
But As we've noted, the institution never publicized the 2006 edit or framed the essay as a retreat. That doesn't mean Native communities themselves never noticed or responded to any of this. Whether the church announced a retreat and whether people inside the communities most affected were aware something had shifted, well, those are different questions.
Since 2014, the church has moved even further away from literal descent. Because, science. Its church history topics page describes the older Lamanite teaching mostly in the past tense. Like, I don't know that we teach that.
Yeah.
I don't
Have we ever?
Yeah.
I don't think we teach that.
Exactly. And in 2022, an editor's note redirected readers away from that language and towards a gathering of Israel framing. But the church never went back and corrected what people had already been taught in missionary discussions, seminary manuals, or the Indian placement program. Members and indigenous converts built parts of their identity and faith around a claim the church later narrowed twice without ever calling either change a correction. I mean, to say narrowed is like, oh.
Yeah.
Such a...
Well, we're being generous today.
Yeah, that's taking the church as framing.
Mm-hmm. There's one document account that puts a name and a face on exactly this. And I'm going to say right here, Hannah and I have a lot more on this person, but that's another episode. So George P. Lee was Navajo, a child participant in the placement program. And in 1975, he became a general authority. So one of the church's senior leadership roles appointed for life. He was the first Native American to hold that role. For years, Lee defended the program and the church's mission to Lamanite people specifically, publicly and pretty forcefully. By the late 1980s, he'd become convinced that the institution itself was abandoning the mission, moving away from the very identity claim he'd built his life's work defending, and he said so publicly. In 1989, he was excommunicated. Historian Matthew Garrett's academic study of the program, drawing on extensive interviews with former participants, found something similar beyond Lee's individual story. Many former placement students described a sense of confusion and abandonment as the church's distinct theological framing of Native identity faded in the decades after the program wound down. So Kimball, it was Spencer W. Kimball, our favorite prophet, who ran the program. And here's what he said from the pulpit.
Yeah, it was really one of his, pet loves, right? In October 1960, Spencer W. Kimball in General Conference said, and then this was later printed in the Improvement era that December, quote, "The day of the Lamanites is nigh. For years they have been growing delightsome, and they are now becoming white and delightsome as they were promised." And so talking about children in the placement program, he said they were, quote, "often lighter than their brothers and sisters in the Hogans on the reservations." According to him, participating in the program was literally whitening their skin.
That just makes me like gag. That's so it's so gross. It's so disgusting. Like, how was their skin getting lighter? I was so confused by all of it.
You were paying attention, because I am thinking, I don't know that I ever made a connection as a child that what we're talking about when we say Lamanites are also the same group of people we're talking about when we talk about Native Americans. Like, I don't know what I thought. I mean, my parents probably tried to explain it to me and I, didn't take it in, but obviously it wasn't integral to my sense of self in the world. I wasn't paying attention to that claim because it didn't matter to me in England. If I was a native child in the US and I was being taught this, yeah, you better believe that would make an impression.
Yeah.
You're being told, like, this is you, these are your people, these are your ancestors.
Right. This is your heritage. This is who you are. And
they're savages,
all of a sudden,
these are your people.
Yeah. They're moving away from it.
Yeah.
But per usual, we have the church here doing what the church does, right? The church can narrow the claim, and it edits one word in its scripture in 2006. It waits until 2014 to offer explanations for why 150 years of literal teaching doesn't have to mean what it plainly said. Doesn't reach out to anything that I could find to the people they said it to help explain to them why there was the shift. But it had taught this broader claim in print. It built a 50-year foster program on top of it, and then it disciplined members who reached the same conclusion that the institution itself would later encode quietly into the pages of the Book of Mormon.
That is an excellent summary. The church taught the claim directly to native members and converts, and as you said, as far as we're aware, they have never gone back and told them that they were wrong. Insane. That's all we have for you today. What a fun essay it was. Thank you for listening. We appreciate you being here.
We really do. And as always, before we go, we want to thank Hannah W. for the incredible vocals on our theme song, Dr. Dave for the solo guitar, Mick for making our theme song sound professional, and Pete for editing.
Thanks again for listening. And if you want to support the show, leaving a review is genuinely one of the most useful things that you can do. It helps new listeners find us. We will see you next time. And Jess, before we go, I am sorry for what I said when I was Mormon.
I am sorry for what I said when I was Mormon too.